Ich möchte also erst gern die Podiumsteilnehmenden vorstellen und dann das Thema vertiefen auf der Grundlage des Impulses, den wir schon gehört haben. Also erstmal möchte ich Ihnen vorstellen, Patricia Cocq. Sie hat einen Master in Rechtswissenschaften und postgraduierten Abschluss in Kriminologie, ja, also sozusagen hier fundierte Basis, und arbeitet seit mehr als 15 Jahren als Rechtsberaterin in der Abteilung Menschenhandel des Föderalen Migrationszentrums, der unabhängigen belgischen Berichterstatterin für Menschenhandel. Steht also auch stark nur für das Thema Berichterstatterinnenstelle. Und ihre Hauptaufgaben bestehen auch in dem jährlichen Bewertungsbericht über die belgische Politik in diesem Bereich, und dass es auch sichergestellt wird, dass es in Gerichtsverfahren eine Weiterverfolgung durch entsprechende rechtliche Schritte gibt. Zu meiner Rechten Brian Varma, Koordinierungszentrum gegen Menschenhandel in den Niederlanden. Er arbeitet seit 2017 als Manager bei Comensha, dem niederländischen Koordinationszentrum gegen Menschenhandel, und nimmt da, so steht sie auch für die zivilgesellschaftliche Seite, nimmt proaktiv Einfluss auf die nationale und internationale Politik zur Bekämpfung des Menschenhandels und ist außerdem auch zuständig für die Registrierung potenzieller Opfer von Menschenhandel und die Erstkoordination der Unterbringung in Schutzeinrichtungen. Vielleicht mal so als erstes, ergänzen Sie gerne. Julia Planitzer hatte ich Ihnen schon vorgestellt, und ja, dann würde ich sagen, steigen wir gleich mal ein. Also so ein bisschen ging ja auch schon die Fragen los im Publikum, ein bisschen aus den Ländern auch zu hören und die Spezifika, auch vielleicht die Debatten und Diskurse kennenzulernen, die beispielsweise in Belgien und dann auch in den Niederlanden rund um die Einrichtung und die Arbeit der Berichterstattungsstellen geführt wurden. Also was sind da die Erfahrungen, was sind auch die Learnings, wo geht was gut und wenn es gut geht, warum, und wo ist was knifflig. Ich gebe mal als erstes an Frau Cocq. Yes.
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to thank very much KOK for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to try to share some positive and maybe less positive experience, what we have to cope in Belgium. So maybe just to a few words of clarification of who we are. So I work for Myria. It's a Federal Migration Center. We are an independent public body, and we have actually 3 missions to ensure for the protection of the rights of foreign people, to inform the public authorities about the extent of migration flows, and finally also to stimulate the fight against human trafficking and human smuggling. And at the moment that Belgium has to implement the European directive and to appoint a national rapporteur, we have been appointed as independent national rapporteur, and the coordination body, which is the interdepartment coordination unit that gather all the department dealing with trafficking and was chaired by a representative of the Minister of Justice, has been appointed as coordination body and also state rapporteur. What does it mean, state rapporteur? They report every 2 years on the different activities of the department, but we report every year on an independent way on the evolution of the results. What does it mean? And actually, we were already busy with this mission since 1995, when we were former the Center for Equal Opportunities and Opposition to Racism. At that time, there was a big concern in Belgium because there were a lot of women exploited in prostitution. So there was a parliamentary commission. There were recommendations made that there were not enough shelter, that the legislation had to be made, and that there was already need for a monitoring institution and that was why the former center was appointed. And so we received the title, well, the official designation to evaluate, to be independent national rapporteur. And shall I already explain how we do that, or is it for?
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes.
So as we speak about data, I think it's very important to speak as well about quantitative data and qualitative data. So every year we publish an annual report which contain different parts, an analysis of the evolution of the political and juridical framework, a case analysis. I mentioned that we have also the possibility to be a civil party in criminal file. So we have the possibility to ask compensation to trafficker in our proper name, also in the name of victims who would give us a mandate. At the very beginning of our mission, so I speak about more than 20 years ago, it was the case, but now that there are also specialized shelters dealing with trafficking, they will do it more if the victim gives this mandate to them. So we also analyze concrete files, and it's a way for us to see whether there are some problem in practice. We also publish some jurisprudence, so it was maybe an answer to Julia. So we also publish juridical decision on our website, and I think it's also an important source of data analysis. I know that UNODC is also busy with analysis of case law, so it's one of the sources for them. We also make a focus every year on a specific topic. How do we choose this focus? Actually in function of some actuality or some problems we see. For instance, one year we published around begging exploitation. Last year our focus was on domestic work and exploitation of domestic workers. And so in our report we also make some recommendations to as well for the authorities and also to actors in the field. And some recommendations are taken over in the action plans of the government. For instance, we noticed the importance through the criminal file, the importance of a financial investigation. It was one of the points that was taken over. Also, the importance of training, because we noticed that if people if there are some specialization in Belgium, if a victim is detected or should be detected by a frontline service, but it's not always the case. Sometimes they see the person, if it's third country national, more as an illegal immigrant, and if they are not aware of the indicators of trafficking, they won't refer them to the specialized shelter, but there's a risk that the person would be deported. So that's also one of the recommendations we made. Also relating to labor exploitation, we noticed in the files that there were a lot of abuses of the posting of workers that can lead sometimes to trafficking. And also the fact that when social inspection services are doing controls, sometimes some specific things they see for them are normal, or I mean are normal for offenses against social law. And they did not always register them. So for instance, how do the people have to work? In which conditions do they have to sleep? Much more details in order to allow the prosecutor to qualify the file as as a human trafficking case. And these are elements that we mention, and now we know that there is progress in the way that some frontline services are dealing in practice. So that's some examples.
Okay. Just thank you very much. One point I would like to understand a little bit better. You pointed out that you are deciding on a focus each year. You know, what is the ground for deciding on a focus? You know, who is deciding what?
Okay, we decide in our organization, as we have a director, a board, in function of, I mentioned the actuality of some problematic issue. 3 years ago, we have made a focus on minors victims of trafficking, because we see that there's still a big challenge to detect them, to protect them, and to refer them adequately. So it's after a discussion, and at this time in Belgium, there's a big discussion in the parliament on reviewing the criminal code, specifically on sexual offenses. And there is a proposal for decriminalizing some part of pimping. And so what should be the impact on trafficking human beings? So well, that's our focus for this year. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Just keep the mic. So thank you. So we will switch to the Netherlands and get more about the discourses, discussions, and experiences and learnings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank KOK for the invitation to be here today and to tell you something about our experience in the Netherlands. It's good that I start a little bit with history. I will keep it very brief, but to give the overview of what Comensha, the Dutch Coordination Center Against Human Trafficking, is, and how, from when we start. And so in 1986, Comensha was established. The main focus back then was on women working in the sex industry and who were potential victims of human trafficking, of sexual exploitation. And over the years, the scope got broader. And nowadays, we are dealing with all forms of exploitation, sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, criminal exploitation, and forced organ removal, regardless age, regardless gender, regardless residency status. From those years on, we started with also a registration of potential victims of human trafficking. But since 2012, when the Netherlands implemented the European directive, Comensha was given formally the task to do the registration of potential victims of human trafficking. So the structure was, the foundation was more structured. But it's also good to know that we have two tasks given by the government, specifically by the Ministry of Justice and Security. That is, on the one hand, the registration of potential victims of human trafficking, and on the other hand, we are in charge of the first coordination when it comes to finding shelter or assist potential victims of human trafficking. And it's good to realize that are two separate tasks, because we get a lot of data. We get data for the registration task, and when it comes to the registration, there is legislation. There is a police data decree where it's stated that the police, the border control, and also the labor inspections are obliged to provide Comensha with information of potential victims of human trafficking at the slightest indication occurs. Other entities, like other NGOs, shelter organizations, lawyers, maybe medical staff, the scope is very broad, they can also provide us registration data, but there's no obligation. So this is already for us sometimes a bottleneck, because I heard it also already before today. There is a big black number, a big black box of potential victims that are not coming into sight. So we are lobbying now also for an obligation for other parties than law enforcement agencies. What is also very important is at what time do we get the information, and what is the link with potential criminal procedures. It's very important that you define potential victimhood, because what we all know from field work, from working with potential victims of human trafficking, most of the time they don't see themselves as a victim and they won't step to authorities. So it's very important to get your information also from field workers, from NGOs, from people, from staff who work in shelter organizations, from migrant organizations also. And they can also report potential victims of human trafficking to us. The data that we collect, we get the whole package. It's in the police degree, it's stated what elements of information we collect. But you need also some personal information in order to get your registration correct. Because several organizations could do a report to Comensha, but it could be the same person, and you want a good registration. So what we do is we collect the information, and then we anonymize the information. And the information we registrate for the registration task, we do this also on behalf of our Dutch national rapporteur, so the Dutch Myria organization. And when it comes to the coordination task, we also get more information, because we are also in charge of finding a good shelter place, so we need to have also some medical information. For example, if someone has a disease, if there are also children in play, if someone worked in a certain branch. That information we don't provide to the national rapporteur, but next to the rapporteur, who's providing his annual report on a yearly basis, we also provide our own annual report. And in that annual report, we are focusing more on the assistant part. So that's for now in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you so much. And to understand better also the mechanism and the question which had to be carefully taken into consideration, and we will talk about data protection in the next phase. I would like to go a bit deeper and ask if you regard the reports, if you look at it, and maybe you can say since when exactly you have it, and what kind of changes did they actually bring? How can you measure how relevant the impact is?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we were founded in 86, and since 86 we are reporting, but in 86 we didn't have a national rapporteur. The first national rapporteur in the Netherlands was appointed in 2000. And since then, what we see is that the reports of the national rapporteur, next to our annual report, it has an enormous impact, especially on politicians. And it's also a way of pointing out the bottlenecks, to give them more political attention. And also, in many times, it's also good to make alliances with the media to give it more attention. And what you also see, the scope is getting broader and broader. For a long time, law enforcement agencies are only focusing on sexual exploitation. especially during COVID. For example, in the Netherlands, you saw that attention was more and more also on labor exploitation. And what you also see, more and more attention is now going to criminal exploitation. So yeah, the reports as well from the national rapporteur as the reports, the annual reports of Comensha, they're very important.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, first, maybe let's look to Belgium. So
I wanted to add also for what are our sources of information for the publication of our report. Actually, we publish a report since 96, but the last year we make a common template, like I mentioned, a recurrent part with the evolution of the legislative framework, the case analysis, the analysis of jurisprudence, data. I forgot to speak about the quantitative data, and the recommendation and the focus. So we publish also quantitative data. How does it function? Actually, we ask the different partners to give us the data, and we receive data from the police on the number of offenses for human trafficking, data from inspection services around labor exploitation, then the data from Justice for the Conviction, from the prosecutor office for the prosecutions, from the Immigration Office on the type of documents delivered to victims of trafficking, and from we have 3 specialized shelters in Belgium, and from the shelters for the new victims who have been supported. The problem is we can publish all those data, but it's not possible to make connection between those data. For instance, we notice for our next annual report to be published in December, we saw that there were less offenses or less cases. I think it's due to the COVID pandemic, and also that there was a more importance of criminal trafficking for criminal offenses. So I think maybe it should be an interesting focus to make for the other years. And but the data that have to be overhanded to the European Commission, for instance, are given by the coordination body. And these are mostly the data from the Immigration Office, relating to the documents provided to victims. And that's why also at European level, I think we have a lot of different data provided depending on which is the source of which organism is providing the data. I think in the Netherlands it's Comensha. So I know that there's a huge amount of trafficking victims, and in Belgium, for instance, these are the victims who are supported. So it's a very few amount. So sometimes it's not always comparable.
Yeah, okay. And again, if I may ask the reports, how influential?
I answered it. So I think there are 3 ways. So some of our recommendations are taken over in the national action plans that is set up by the coordination body. Second is to raise awareness on specific issues like begging exploitation, non-punishment provision. So less known form of exploitation, and then to influence practices. I mentioned that we noticed that some cases of labor exploitation were dealt with abuse of posting of workers. So we know that now labor inspection services are putting more attention on that specific aspect, or they are paying more attention to the report, to set up more detailed report in order to allow the prosecutor to qualify easily a file as a trafficking case file.
And Patricia, if it's influential regarding the action plans and raising awareness and so on, as you described it, would you say, is there any relevant framework we should specially take into consideration, or where we can learn from? Brian said media is relevant, for example, from the Belgium experience, would you say any relevant framework to make the report work towards this influence?
We have a legislative basis that we have to publish this report, and this report is overhanded to the parliament, to the government, but there's no obligation for the government to take over all recommendations, you know, so there's always a discussion on which recommendations they will take over.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, Julia, what do you think about listening to that? Yeah, so we learned also about the sensitivity of data already. I mean, one point at listening from this, which kind of data do we need to bring all that together? Say also regarding data protection, which data should be kept silent and which one should be forwarded and provided. Ja, Micro.
Ja, ich denke, da tun sich sehr viele Fragen auf, ja, weil es wirklich halt einfach ein sehr herausforderndes Gebiet ist. Also die Frage, die mir jetzt als erstes einfällt, ist so, wann ist eine Person eine identifizierte betroffene Person? Also auch da gibt es halt, glaube ich, also so aus meiner Erfahrung, sehr große Unterschiede in den einzelnen Staaten und auch bei der Erstellung von Datenbanken. Manche Staaten sprechen von Potential Victims and Identified Victims. Und das wurde auch kurz vorhin angesprochen, daher sind die Zahlen, glaube ich, auch sehr unterschiedlich, aber das ist halt, glaube ich, etwas, was sich dann genau bei dieser Datensammlung dann zeigt, wie geht der Staat davor, wer entscheidet, wer ist betroffene Person, wen sieht der Staat als betroffene Personen, wer wird unterstützt von NGOs, das kann ja auch sehr unterschiedlich sein. Also das ist halt schon einmal, glaube ich, ein sehr großes herausforderndes Problem, ja, das zu lösen, irgendwie, um zu irgendwie vergleichbaren Daten. Also vergleichbare Daten innerhalb der Staaten ist, glaube ich, noch einmal ganz eine andere Dimension. Also ich glaube, der erste Schritt muss einmal sein, dass der Staat als solches mit allen Akteuren inklusive der Zivilgesellschaft ein System etablieren kann, um die Situation im Land darstellen zu können. Ja, was sollte ich da noch sagen?
Datenschutz vielleicht noch ein Stichwort, also die als eine die Kategorien, nicht? Also wer wird überhaupt in welcher Kategorie betrachtet, aufgenommen, wer definiert das, und das andere, wie mit den Informationen selbst.
Also zu den Kategorien selber, also aus Sicht von GRETA gibt es eben die Empfehlung, welche statistischen Daten wichtig wären, und die Konvention als solches verweist in Artikel 11 auf die Datenschutzkonvention des Europarats. Und da ist halt eines schon dieser Grundsätze, es darf halt nicht überschießend sein für den Zweck der Datensammlung. Also ich glaube, verkürzt gesagt, weniger ist mehr. Aber die Frage natürlich ist wieder, ja natürlich, GRETA möchte ja auch Daten zu Informationen, wo es darum geht, inwieweit die Rechte von Betroffenen tatsächlich jetzt umgesetzt werden. Das sind wieder, ja, wie viele ganz andere Daten, wie oft gibt es Entschädigung oder wie oft war es jetzt möglich, einen Aufenthaltstitel zu bekommen für die Person, oder auch für die längerfristigere Social Inclusion dann danach, ja, gibt es irgendwie Zugang zu Sozialleistungen. Das wären auch Daten, die halt auch sehr wichtig wären, um zu zeigen, wie die einzelnen Verpflichtungen der Konvention tatsächlich auch bei den Betroffenen ankommen. Also das so zu den Kategorien, auch da ja, prinzipiell statistische Daten. Die Frage ist halt immer, wie werden die personenbezogenen Daten zu statistischen Daten und wann passiert das? Und ich befürchte, ich kann da keine jetzt eindeutige Antwort geben. Aus meiner Sicht, wer die personenbezogenen Daten hat, es muss dann in einem frühen Stadium der Datensammlung halt geschehen, dass sie zu nicht mehr personenbezogene Daten werden. Aber da, glaube ich, gibt es sehr, sehr große Diskussionen, ab wann Daten nicht mehr personenbezogen sind. Also auch wenn die Daten pseudonymisiert sind mit einer Nummer, ist das trotzdem noch nachvollziehbar. Es kommt natürlich halt darauf an, welche Daten da konkret zusammengesammelt werden. Ist es nachvollziehbar noch immer, welche Person das ist, oder sind sie halt wirklich anonymisiert ab einem gewissen Zeitpunkt? Ja, aber ich glaube, das sind tatsächlich noch viele Fragen, die verschiedene Staaten da schon durchaus Erfahrung haben, andere noch nicht so viel.
Ja, vielen Dank. Vielleicht können wir ja noch mal hören, ne? Also vielleicht hier auch wieder noch mal Belgien und die Niederlande, wo es Erfahrungen gibt und gute Beispiele und gute Praxen, um sich diesen Herausforderungen und Fragen zu nähern. Patricia hatte schon gesagt, diese Daten, die so nebeneinander laufen und so schwer zu vergleichen sind. Also wo gibt es vielleicht gute Praxen, wo gibt es Ansatzpunkte und gibt es was, wo Sie sagen würden, Deutschland von lernen kann? Brian?
Yes. I just want to mention something also regarding to what you just said, and that is what we see is that when it comes to data protection and the GDPR, is that I mentioned before there is an obligation in the Netherlands for the law enforcement agencies to provide us with the data. For other organizations, such like youth care organizations and shelter organizations, there's no obligation. And what we saw since 2018, when the GDPR came into force, is that they were more hesitant than before to provide us with information. And they are now, most of the organizations are on the stand of view that they need consent. But the discussion we are now having is how this consent is given. Is it given freely? Does the person know to what he or she gives consent? And we are now in discussion also with legal experts and the government and the Dutch Privacy Authority to make a discussion about this, because we don't believe that a person who is violated in a very bad position, very vulnerable, is able to give consent in the way it's stated in the GDPR. So I don't know if you have any remarks on that.
Directly?
Also es ist ja auch, die Problematik wurde ja auch im letzten GRETA-Bericht zu den Niederlanden diskutiert. Und meines Wissens nach ging es auch darum, dass Eltern nicht den Consent oder die Zustimmung für die Kinder geben können und daher auch diese Institutionen dann die Daten nicht weitergeben. Ich persönlich frage mich dann, wie können keine personenbezogenen Daten, sondern andere Daten von dieser einen Institution an Comensha übermittelt werden. Also die Frage, die sich mir stellt, ist es möglich, dass es bereits ab diesem Zeitpunkt statistische Daten sein können, nicht personenbezogene, die halt dann weitergegeben werden, um so dieses Problem zu umgehen.
Brian, what would you say? Thank you. Maybe Patricia as well. Thank you.
The reason why we want a little bit more information, only at the beginning, is to make sure that the data is correct. Because in Dutch we call it double telling. You want, double counting. You have to have a correct data set also for the national rapporteur to provide good reports. So you need it only in the beginning, and then you don't need it anymore. And we're very transparent also on our website, in our privacy regulation, what we are doing with the data, that we anonymize the data, that how we provide data to third parties. And
yeah, Patricia, thank you.
Sorry, maybe I could give some challenges we are confronted also in collecting more quantitative data at the moment. So at the moment there's a discussion within the coordination body on how to better register in order to overhand it data on presumed and identified victims, and there are discussion at the moment on who is the identified victim, and not all the services do agree at the moment. So we have to have an agreement. And the presumed victim, it should be the victims, the person who are referred to one of the 3 specialized shelters. But at the moment that one person is referred to a specialized shelters, there's an intake from the shelter in order to assess the situation. And sometimes it appears that there are more victims of domestic violence or so on, so they will refer them to other services. And at the moment at Myria, we are trying with the 3 specialized shelters to develop a common electronic file and database. Actually, there's a double aim. First, to allow the specialized shelter to have their own electronic file on each victims, meaning the basic data on the name, the gender, type of exploitation, but also which person is, which social services is competent, which prosecutor, and at the same time also the data that would be useful for us, meaning how is it going with the judicial procedure, did the victim receive compensation, and so on. Did the person receive a residence permit? So that's the challenge we are confronted with at the moment. There was also an attempt, but I speak about more than 10 years ago, to implement a computerized information network based on anonymous data provided by the relevant partner, so the members of the coordination body, the Federal Police, the Board of Prosecutor General, Immigration Office, and Ministry of Employment. But it was a failure. Why? Because the aim of the project was not so clear. Some wanted to have a strategic analysis, another wanted to have more operational analysis. The problem was also that not each service do register on the same way. For instance, for labor exploitation in the framework of human trafficking, the definition of the police of the prosecution offices was less extensive than the one of labor the labor services who registered also all infringement on social law. And there was also no budget for the implementation, and the data collection methodology was also not clear. So that was an attempt, but a failure. And I wanted also to, we wanted also to think about how to better provide data on the amount of real victim in Belgium, because the data was registered are the one who are supported by the shelters. And I was interested by one of the points of the GRETA, how many people do have access to free legal aid, or how many people did receive compensation. At the moment, we are in Belgium, for instance, not able to give this type of information unless that the shelter are looking in every individual file, and there are also cases coming to court where victims are civil party but were not supported by one of the 3 shelters. There are also victims mentioned in a juridical a decision of the court, but do not appear on any other place. And at the moment, at the level of the prosecution office, they register data on the file, on the suspects and so on, but not that much victims. So I think it should be much better, but I think is it realistic? That's another question, and I think it's worthwhile to think about it and to see how could we improve the thing, but to have a better idea on the phenomenon, because at the moment it's limited to actually the action of the authorities toward the phenomenon.
Okay, thank you. So I would leave for a moment to take all the ideas and the challenges. I hear a lot. Yeah? So to focus a bit again on the question of civil society as a specific stakeholder group, let's say, and how would you consider the role of civil society in all this regarding data collection, protection, providing impact? Do you see any specific element which we should better understand and point out?
Yeah, the role of civil society is, in our view, very important when it comes to registration of data. Especially, I just mentioned also, we don't want to link the registration only to law enforcement agencies and the formal identification, because then you don't have the broad overview. Some people never enter the legal system, but they still are a potential victim of human trafficking, and there is the role of the civil society very important, because they are grassroots organizations, they are in close contact with potential victims of human trafficking, special target groups like transgenders, like migrant groups, like, you can name them. So the role is very important, also in raising more awareness, not only for the non-traditional partners, but also for the traditional partners. Still, raising awareness is necessary. For example, for the law enforcement agencies, when it comes to the not traditional forms of exploitation, the criminal exploitation. And also, when you look to forced organ removal, we have a few number of cases reported to Comensha that was because of some medical staff at the hospital got a raising awareness meeting via our office. If they didn't have that, they would find us. So it's very important that raising awareness activities are set in place by the NGOs.
Thank you. Julia, you would like to contribute as well, civil society from your perspective? Where is a specific role? Might be German here. Where do you see it? Specific strength, specific potential?
Ja, also ich glaube, ich weiß nicht, ob ich jetzt so viel andere Informationen jetzt noch dazu komplementär sagen kann, außer, ja, natürlich ist die Rolle der NGOs sehr wichtig aus Sicht von GRETA. Das ist ja auch eine sehr wichtige Quelle bei den Evaluierungen, natürlich auch die Daten. Ich glaube, das wird ja auch im nächsten Panel diskutiert, zum Beispiel die Unterschiede zwischen KOK-Daten und Lageberichtdaten, also welche Unterschiede sich da geben und wie sie auch komplementär sein können. Ja. Die Frage ist sicher noch, in welcher Form und wie werden NGOs eingebunden in eine Datensammlung. Ja. Also gibt es irgendwie...
Gibt es da gute Beispiele?
Namen, bitte?
Gute Beispiele?
Ja, ich weiß nicht, aus meiner Sicht müsste es in einem nationalen Referral Mechanism geklärt sein, wie NGOs und in welcher Form sie Daten weitergeben können und auch dazu eingeladen werden, dazu beizutragen bei der Datensammlung. Aber für mich ist es wieder, und wie auch schon vorhin kurz angesprochen, auch eine Frage der Identifizierung oder Registrierung. Wer registriert, wann eine betroffene Person als Betroffene des Menschenhandels oder wann ist es ein Potential oder eine Potential Victim of Trafficking. Und ich glaube, das ist auch, also das ist eine Grundherausforderung, das zu klären. Also es gibt ja auch Staaten, wo eine Person erst dann identifiziert ist, wenn es tatsächlich zu einem Strafverfahren kommt. Und wir wissen, dass die Zahlen von Strafverfahren sehr gering sind. Also es gibt einfach sehr viele, die dann am Weg bis hin zu einem Strafverfahren nicht mehr als Opfer gezählt werden, weil, weiß ich nicht, das Verfahren wird eingestellt aus Mangel an Beweisen, es wird ein anderer Straftatbestand verwendet. Also es gibt viele Gründe, warum da einfach sehr wenige übrig bleiben dann im Endeffekt. Also das wäre auch wieder nicht das, sage ich jetzt, das volle Bild, ja, wenn es zu diesen Formen kommt. Und ich finde da zum Beispiel eine EGMR-Entscheidung sehr erhellend, Je und andere gegen Österreich. Da ging es um philippinische Hausangestellte, die für eine Familie in Dubai gearbeitet hat und dann kurz in Österreich war und dort dann dieser Situation entkommen konnten. Und da finde ich, ist es sehr wichtig, dass in der EGMR klar gesagt hat, also die Identifizierung hängt jetzt nicht mit einem Strafverfahren zusammen. GRETA betont das auch natürlich in den Empfehlungen, aber mit diesem EGMR-Urteil ist es noch klarer und ich finde, das ist einfach so ein wichtiger Punkt für diese ganze Datensammlung, dass es nicht davon abhängt, ob es jetzt ein Strafverfahren gibt, dass eine Person identifiziert werden kann und auch die Unterstützung nicht davon abhängt. Also das gibt dann auch wieder die Frage eben, wen können NGOs unterstützen? Was ich auch schon vorhin gesagt habe, eben wer wird von NGOs unterstützt und wer wird dann offiziell identifiziert, das kann auch unterschiedlich sein. Aber da ist eben wirklich auch klar, auch die Unterstützung ist unabhängig von ja, des Strafverfahrens im Endeffekt. Dann, ja.
Vielen Dank. Patricia, civil society, specific role?
Yes, I can refer to what Brian said for the important role of civil society in order to raise awareness and to support victims. In Belgium also there were a specific sensibilization of hospitals because there are also victims that can come to hospitals, so there was a specific campaign and specific brochures developed for them. The importance of the national referral mechanism, as Julia mentioned, is also very important. And at the moment, in our quantitative data, we do not publish all victims referred to the shelters who can be presumed victim, but I think that this is something we are thinking about to give a broad image, but as I mentioned, sometimes within this group there are also other types of victims. At the moment, so the three shelters register themselves, the victims they are supported, and they give us the information so that we can publish. But then these are only the victims who are in the specific procedure, so it does not reveal the real amount of victims. So if one state has the miracle solution, we're interested to hear about that, but indeed it's quite difficult.
Maybe we have to, get a wider range of wisdom now, und schauen uns mal im Saal welche Fragen, Anregungen, Kommentare es gibt, bevor wir hier vielleicht auch noch mal gucken, ob es doch sowas wie doch mal generelle Empfehlungen aus den jeweiligen Ländern bzw. internationalen Perspektiven für die Weiterentwicklung in Deutschland gibt. Ja, aber ich gucke jetzt mal Sie an. Ne? Vielleicht können Sie beitragen. Hier vorne eine Hand, hier gleich im KOK-Team eine ganze Menge Hände und dorthin brauchen alle Mikrofone und hier der Herr vorne. Aber hier die Dame in Grün als erstes. Ich wahrgenommen, hier vorne. Ja? Es bringt Glück.
Ja, zum Glück keine Scherben.
Ja.
Erstmal vielen Dank für das Teilen all dieser Erfahrungen. Mein Name ist Verena Keck, ich arbeite für ECPAT Deutschland, Arbeitsgemeinschaft zum Schutz der Kinder vor sexueller Ausbeutung. Frau Cocq, ich habe eine Frage an Sie. Sie haben gesagt, vor etwa 2 Jahren hat sich Belgien auch fokussiert auf die Erfassung von den Minderjährigen. Und da wäre meine Frage, was sind die Ansatzpunkte, die Sie da gewählt haben oder gewählt wurden? und was kann man da vielleicht als hilfreiche Ideen mitnehmen?
Vielen Dank. Ich würde sagen, wir sammeln wieder so zwei, drei Fragen. Ist okay?
Dank.
Sophia?
Ich habe kurze Rückfragen. Erstmal würde ich gerne wissen, in Belgien, das Thema Unabhängigkeit. Wie wird das definiert? Weil ich habe verstanden, das belgische Migrationszentrum, was ich als staatliche Behörde verstehe, veröffentlicht die Berichte. Maybe you can explain a little bit more on that. Second question, is there any financial support provided by the national rapporteur in order to build up the resources with the NGOs so that they can collate and provide data? Because what we feel at KOK, it's like not only very time consuming, but also the technique to have in place is quite cost intensive. And then last question would be, what about countries that are characterized by a very diverse federalistic system? How to establish a national referral mechanism, or what kind of replacement would you foresee for Germany? Because we don't have an NRM, and I don't think it's likely to have it in near future. Thank you.
Schaffen wir noch eine?
This is Danielle from the International Organization for Migration. I have a question for everyone in the panel. Do you think also transnational work could also be vital or essential in the case of identifying trafficked victims? Because I feel like it should be a two-way thing, and not only in Germany. I think in the countries of origin, or in countries where especially there's higher number of trafficked victims like Vietnam, Romania, and Bulgaria, any country that can be identified and also included in their educational systems or civil societies there. So if you think it's vital, how vital it is?
Okay. Did you get the question? So shall we ask again? One sentence more. Can you please give us one sentence more to your question? It was about the transnational work? Yes? Okay.
Yes, and also data collection, my colleague is here also. Yes, it's about the transnational work and how important it is in the efforts of identifying trafficked victims, and to improve the data collection worldwide, actually, with transnational effort. I hope this is clear now.
Right. Julia? Okay. So I think there was one question for specifically Patricia, then the rest, maybe you can choose something.
Sorry if I didn't express myself very well. I didn't say that there was an attempt for data collection specifically on minors. I said that we are trying to set up a database for trafficked victims supported by the 3 shelters. And in order to allow at the same time that they can follow the file of the victim, but at the same time a system that would allow us to have real data and that we can make analysis of this data. Relating to minors, it remains a huge challenge because there are very few detected and identified. One of the problems is also that they fall under the competence of different services. If they are unaccompanied minors, also immigration service, but the Euro services and so on. So at the moment, the data who are available for trafficked victims are the data from the immigration office, meaning the minors who are also in the specific procedure for victims of trafficking, and the minors supported by the shelters. But beside those, you have other unaccompanied minors, for instance, who are in other procedure. We have a specific procedure for unaccompanied minors, or if they ask asylum. And we have also at the moment a lot of Belgian trafficked victims with the loverboard technique and so on. And those do not appear in the quantitative data. So it's also, I think, a challenge for us. And should I go further with the question of the independence? So actually, I mentioned we have an independent public body because we are also, well, before historical, we were the Center for Equal Opportunities in opposition to racism, who has been appointed as a human rights institution with Principle of Paris, B. Now we are divided into two different institutions. So UNIA, maybe you know UNIA, our body fighting against discrimination and racism, which is human rights institutions, and we are also cooperating with them. And we were established by a law of parliament. And so we publish our annual evaluation report on trafficking that is set in a law, and the government has also to publish every 2 years their report, but as I mentioned, is more a state report describing what the activity was of each of the departments. And I wanted also to add something more for the sources for our reports are also interviews, semi-structured interviews with actors in the field.
Yeah, maybe you can continue afterwards. And Brian, do you want to continue and wrap?
Yes, there was a question about funding. Every year we get funding from the government for our main tasks, and two of the main tasks, one is the registration, the other and the care coordination. And with that budget, we have to deal with it. But it's also a matter for municipalities, because the other question you had was the diversity and the structure of the nation. The Netherlands is not that big, but very complex in the structure, in the way of structure, it's structurized. Because the national government is financially responsible for third country national victims. But the municipalities, and we have 348 municipalities, are financially responsible for their own nationals and European victims. So also municipalities contribute, and they contribute to, for example, healthcare organizations who provide us with data. So it's a joint financial structure and a joint effort. Regarding to the question about transnational cooperation, we believe it's vital, it's very important, and that's why we also participating in several European networks, and also a European network with angles to other continents, together also with KOK in La Strada International and the EU Civil Society Platform, the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator this morning also mentioned. And especially also when we have our annual report, we see what kind of nationalities are in the top 3. And that is also for us a focus point in our advocacy work and also in our conversations with State Department and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that embassies are alerted also. And yeah, so it's very important.
Okay, thank you. Julia? Transnational work, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, the transnational, yeah. And the transnational work. Yeah. My understanding was also about the question that it's also about like how data are shared between states, for instance. Okay. And I think, of course, when states cooperate and also NGOs cooperate, for instance, when a person returns, of course, data have to be shared. I think there is cooperation between NGOs, for instance, for certain countries, they have their cooperation mechanisms. But apart from that, I think it's very challenging already to have a system within one country. So, and again, we have these principles of data collection, data protection in the Article 11 in saying, okay, personal data should be kept to a minimum, should not be stored for a long time, only for the purpose. So I would see that challenging, like if this was the question, how personal data could be shared between. So I think apart from law enforcement or really cooperation among NGOs for a return, for instance, I would see it rather challenging based on my, I have to say, limited knowledge now on data protection specifically, but so that's my experience now. Yeah, and concerning the NRM question, it's also coming up so many questions that are unsolved. Of course, GRETA stresses that an NRM is important because I think it gives a good framework in order to answer questions on who is actually providing which data, and starting with this question on who identifies. Yeah, so this should be answered to a certain extent in an NRM. Yeah. I can't come up now with well, a solution in saying, okay, this is not a solution for countries.
Just to make sure for us, is there anywhere in the world a place where it works a little better than somewhere else?
I think there are some examples where there is data collection and documentation, and where it works better than in other countries. I mean, there are states parties where there is no, well, there are states that collect data, of course, but maybe the NGOs are not involved, or there is no available data on certain issues, or it's a very limited set of data. So I think states parties in general of the convention collect data. The question is, to which extent can it really help the implementation of the convention and really see how trafficked persons have access to these rights. But as Patricia said before, how realistic is it really to get all this data? Yes, I see that, yes, that it's of course very challenging, but on the one hand, I mean, we really try to see with compensation. I think that's an example where data definitely pushed the topic because there were projects in the countries and court cases have been analyzed, and then the number out of, I don't know, in Austria, I was involved with LEFE when we analyzed the court cases, and it were 76 court cases and 5 actually received compensation, and with this number we were able to lobby back then. Okay. So, and I think compensation as such really is an example showing that data or the gap of data helps to push the topic forward. The NRM again, well, KOK was able to make this report, so definitely civil society actors are very important to come up with the data. Although there is not a nationwide NRM, but also the Lagebericht shows that there are data possible, even in different areas, even if it's a federal system. Yeah.
Vielen Dank erstmal. Wir haben noch Gelegenheit, ich sehe schon, das ist ordentlich knifflig, ja. Wir haben aber noch eine Gelegenheit für eine zweite Fragerunde, ja, aus dem Publikum. Hier war schon eine Hand hier und dort nochmal jemand. Mhm.
Thank you, Richard Piotrowicz again. I would like to make a point rather than a question, and I do so as a former member of GRETA. You're speaking, and it's with regard to data protection, but also the role of civil society. And we are in a country where there's a pretty strong civil society. All of you come from countries where, bluntly, there's a pretty strong civil society. And all you're talking about is the role of civil society in these rather, in my view, privileged countries in the context of what we're talking about. And yet the EU alone has a significant disparity when it comes to the collection of data and also the strength of civil society and the pressures under which NGOs are operating. And I named just one example, Poland, which I partly come from. The Council of Europe Convention has been ratified by 47 countries. I've been to many of them, from the north to the south and the west to the east, and I can tell you in at least one or two, there is no real civil society. There is a name. But the people, if they come and speak to us, they're showing a lot of courage. And when, therefore, and I am in no way being critical of you, I'm just saying that our discussion is a little bit limited, is reasonable, because we're talking maybe about the situation in Germany. That's fair enough. But that is not the situation throughout the area of the Council of Europe Convention. No way is it like that.
Thank you. Over there.
Ja, Eva Kübelbeck, ich bin beim KOK als Referentin und ich freue mich, dass Richard das angesprochen hat, weil meine Frage geht eigentlich an Brian. Ich stelle sie jetzt trotzdem auf Deutsch und verlasse mich auf unsere Übersetzerinnen. Und ich habe mir überlegt, diese doppelte Aufgabe, die die Stelle ja hat, also kommt es manchmal da auch vor, dass es ein Spannungsverhältnis innerhalb von Comensha verursacht? Weil es wäre ja beispielsweise denkbar, es gibt sehr, sehr viele Registrierungen bei Comensha, aber bei den Strafverfolgungsbehörden kommt so gut wie niemand an. Könnte die Polizei oder Strafverfolgungsbehörden einfach Druck auf Comensha aufbauen, was jetzt vielleicht in einem Land wie Richard es meinte, wo die Zivilgesellschaft nicht so stark ist und sich nicht so gut wehren kann, vielleicht noch viel eher auch der Fall sein könnte. Also ist das vielleicht in dieser doppelten Rolle möglicherweise so ein Problem angelegt? War nur meine Überlegung. Danke.
Ja, hier vorne noch.
I would just like to add something to the lack of civil society structures. There's also one barrier I see in the counseling, because I always work directly also with people, namely migrants. One thing is also some countries actually, they promote smuggling, they promote everything because of the remittances that people can send to their home countries. For instance, in Vietnam, we have been working with our missions, IOM missions in Vietnam, to try to identify victims of trafficking and tell them, so we have identified these people, of course in collaboration with local specialized agencies or NGOs here, but they don't do anything, the government. I mean, I'm not criticizing the government, but then when we delve deeper into the talks with them, it was one of the arguments that was brought up is that people who go abroad are very vital for the Vietnamese economy because they bring money to the country. And this is also one barrier I see, in addition to the lack of civil society structures in some countries existent as well. And also I see one more barrier. It's also people do not like to be identified as victims. So when I try to see red flags all the way, of course it's a combination of things, indicators that I see in people, and they don't know that they are victims. This is the black box that Brian was mentioning. I see it all the time. People don't want to be identified like this, and this is also one challenge I have in my counseling efforts. I cannot tell the people, oh, you're a victim, you're a trafficked victim, or something like this. I try to find in the countries of origin some kind of a support system that can help them. So I just wanted to add this on what the minister said from the other side.
Thank you. Maybe one last, and then we go back to... okay. Two. Will we manage? Two more? Okay. So maybe you will make notes for yourself and where you see resonance in answering the questions here. So, but one here, one there.
Okay, soll ich starten?
Ja.
Gut. Iris Muth vom Bundesfamilienministerium. Erstmal ganz herzlichen Dank. Das war für mich sehr, sehr aufschlussreich. Auch ganz herzlichen Dank an Sie, Frau Planitzer, für Ihre Klarheit hinsichtlich der Strukturen. Ich finde, Sie haben nochmal sehr deutlich gemacht, den Unterschied zwischen der Koordinierungsstelle und dem nationalen Berichterstattungsmechanismus. Meine Frage basiert auf Ihren Ausführungen gehend an die Niederlande und Belgien. Sie haben das System von den nationalen Berichterstattern beschrieben, auch die Unabhängigkeit oder Teilunabhängigkeit. Mich würde noch mal interessieren, ob Sie daneben noch eine Struktur innerhalb Ihrer jeweiligen Regierung haben, die koordinierende Funktion hat, strategische Funktion für die Regierung und die auch möglicherweise die Vertretung Ihres Landes in dem NAIM-Treffen der EU ist.
Vielen Dank. Und jetzt dann wirklich die letzte, die Dame im Grün.
Thank you for the discussion round. My name is Aiko Takahashi, working in the women's shelter Banying in Berlin. My question is, in times of like right-wing arising in Europe, are there also some attacks on the server, which a lot of like sensitive data collection, also with the focus of if people are collecting about like people's nationalities or migration routes? Like I can imagine there are also interests with like from right-wing parties or groups, like just not just a text, like is it also part of the discussion? Thank you.
Okay, so we go back. Brian, do you want to start? There was quite a lot of questions going towards civil society questions. Do you want to start, you know, the differences amongst the countries and the standards of civil society and so on, and also, you know, where to get the data.
I totally agree that there is a big difference and that we are privileged in our Western European countries and that we have close cooperation with governmental organizations and that we sometimes agree and then we disagree and there's room for discussion. And what we see nowadays, especially also with our NGO platform and countries like Hungary, Poland, it's very difficult, it's getting more difficult to do their jobs in a good way. So we realize that we are in a privileged situation. When it comes to the question regarding that maybe, for example, last year we got a lot of registrations from an NGO called Fair Work. They are dealing with migrants and there was a lot of things going on during COVID-19. The measures, the lockdown, people, vulnerable people lost their jobs, but none of those cases became criminal cases. So the labor inspectorate didn't provide us with the data, but the NGO provided the data. And that led to a set of questions from Member of Parliament. Last week, there came out a report and it stated that the labor inspector didn't do their job very well. So on the other hand, it's also very useful to gather your information from different angles. Question you mentioned it was.
The last one was regarding one of the last ones was regarding the governance structure, yeah, between the coordination and the national reporting arena. Yeah, and is there a need for for an additional body, for example?
Yeah. In 2018, when the former new government was installed, they prioritized, thankfully, human trafficking and they set up a new national action plan, coordinated by the Ministry of Justice and Security, but it was an alliance between several ministries, Ministry of Social Affairs, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, under coordination by the Ministry of Justice and Security. And they set up also an interministerial program. All the NGOs and other stakeholders also provided information for the National Action Plan, but there is now a coordination function within the government, and the Ministry of Justice and Security is the one that's in charge of it.
Thank you. Patricia, do you want to carry on?
I wanted to add on the question about the coordination structure and the rapporteur. In Belgium, we think it's very important to have the system, two different systems, a coordination body and an independent national rapporteur. Why? We notice, for instance, in practice that as independent national rapporteur, it gives you access and to contact all actors on an equal basis. It gives you the possibility to evaluate the policy at all levels. We think it should be much more difficult to be in constructive critical if we were, for instance, from the Ministry of Justice, than if we are outside. But we think also that's a complementary role with the coordination body. In Belgium, how is it organized? So this, the coordination body is chaired by the Minister of Justice, or is representative, and gathers so all services dealing at one another title with this topic. So we have the police, the prosecutors, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry, the labor inspectorates, so Foreign Affairs, Immigration Office, and many others. I can send you the list if you want, but also the NGOs and the independent national rapporteur. And there's also a bureau, which is more the executive organ, because the coordination body gathers only twice a year, and the executive organ, the bureau, gathers every month, and is in charge of preparing and implementing the policy relating to human trafficking, and to encourage also the exchange of communication between the bodies. So that's why I mentioned the national action plans, for instance, are prepared within this coordination body, the organization of trainings and so on. But we think it's also important to have two apart structure, but they are perfect complementary. So we make recommendations, they take over some recommendations, and we are also both present at the A meeting of national rapporteur, for instance. They will represent the state, we will represent but I think it's the same for the Netherlands. The independent national rapporteur and the coordination body is present. A second thing I wanted to mention was related to the fact that some people do not want to be identified as victims or do not recognize themselves as victims. And I want to mention maybe a best practice in Belgium, because in Belgium, the specific system for victims of trafficking allow them at the end of the judicial procedure to receive a permanent definitive stay permit. And we think it's a very important point, because if you link the procedure with the evolution of the criminal procedure, if you ask the victim to cooperate or to make statements, and after 6 months you think, thank you very much, bye-bye, it doesn't work like that. So you need to give perspective. So I think this is maybe an element that can be interesting. And I think there was also another question relating to the national referral mechanism. What within a federal state? Belgium is also a federal state, even much smaller, as we have one specialized shelter in one of the three regions. And I think one important element, and I think it was also mentioned in the report you just published, is the importance of specialization, develop specialization as well within law enforcement as within NGOs, in order to know if there's a victim detected, who has the victim to be referred to, who will initiate a case, and so on. I think specialization is one important element in the framework of an effective national referral mechanism.
Yeah, something in addition.
Yeah, something additional. I remembered the possible misuse of figures. What is very important is when you present your figures, there is context with it, an explanation. But still, it's possible. Especially some political parties. We had, in our belief, in our NGO world belief, the idea that last year something like that happened, because in the registration there was an enormous growth. It was 2 years ago, because last year was COVID year. 2 years before, there was an enormous growth of Nigerian in our registration, and also at the police stations there was a waiting list for filing complaints by people from Nigerian background. And in order to deal with the waiting lists at the police station, the national government strengthened the regulation, especially for people with Dublin claims. And most of the time, the Nigerian people were people who were coming to the Netherlands from Italy and had a Dublin claim, but were a potential victim of human trafficking. So in that case, we believed the central government and some political parties used the information without the context in their advantage. So yeah, it can be possible.
Brian, may I ask you directly, because regarding time, it's more or less our last round now, and looking at what we discussed, what you heard in the morning, all the speeches, what your colleagues contributed. What are your impulses, learnings you take away, and do you have some recommendation for Germany? Because this is a bit the bridge for the next panel, when it will be focusing on Germany, what's going on regarding data collection and reporting and so on. Do you have any advices, recommendations for us?
So what I've been heard today, I think it's very good, the steps that have been taken by Germany, and also the reports KOK brought out. I think it's very thorough. You think good on what could be bottlenecks. You ask for examples from Belgium, from the Netherlands. What I think is very important to build up a good structure with a legal basis, an assignment from the central government also to an authority that is doing the job, and also with the funding, and that it should be stated that it should not be on project basis, but it's fundamental and it is long term. So funding is very important. Legal structure is very important, and also to be able to be flexible, because in a world of the fight against human trafficking, you have to be very flexible.
Thank you very much. Patricia, may I pass it over to you?
Yes, I can join what Brian said on the importance to have a legal basis, also the importance of funding, and one important element also we repeat every year in Belgium is to make of human trafficking a priority at all levels, so as well at political levels and on the field. I wanted also to add, relating to data collection, because I think we were a lot speaking about quantitative data, but the importance of qualitative data I mentioned you the access that we have to the implementation through the file, the criminal file. We are a civil party, and the need also of multidisciplinary cooperation and a good national referral mechanism.
Thank you. Julia, what do you take back home and recommendations for Germany?
Well, ich habe bei meinem Vortrag erklärt, welche Empfehlungen GRETA in Bezug auf Daten gibt, aber was mir jetzt eingefallen ist, wurde schon genannt, das Funding. Ja? Und ich finde, das ist jetzt nicht nur in Bezug auf die Datensammlung ein sehr wichtiger Punkt, weil das wurde ja auch angesprochen, dass das sehr komplex ist und natürlich Zeit in Anspruch nimmt. Und ich glaube, das ist gerade in vielen Staaten ein Punkt, wo verstanden wird, dass das auch wirklich Mittel benötigt. Also ich habe manchmal den Eindruck, manche Staaten wollen schnell eine Datenbank, aber es ist eine jahrelange Übung. Also wir sehen hier bei den Ländern, die hier vertreten sind, dass es eine sehr lange, jahrelange Etablierung braucht und auch bei dem Beispiel jetzt mit Deutschland, wie lange diese Vorbereitung braucht, und es geht nicht schnell und es braucht einfach Ressourcen. Und ich glaube, diese Ressourcen braucht es aber auch, dieses Sustainable Funding, also dieses nicht projektbasierte Funding braucht es auch genauso für die Zivilgesellschaft, ja, weil auch da gibt es dann wieder die Fragen, die auch schon vorhin diskutiert wurden. Wer identifiziert, wen können Organisationen unterstützen und wie wird diese Finanzierung dann von Organisationen und der Zivilgesellschaft organisiert in dem Staat? Es gibt Staaten, wo klar ist, dass es nur eine Finanzierung oder eine Unterstützung gibt für Personen, die dann identifiziert werden. Dürfen auch andere unterstützt werden oder nicht? Und ich glaube, das sind so Grundfragen, die vorher geklärt sein müssen, inklusive einer ausreichenden Finanzierung dieser Tätigkeit in der Zivilgesellschaft, bevor man weitergehen kann zur Datensammlung in dem Bereich.
Ja, vielen Dank allen Teilnehmerinnen hier auf dem ersten Panel. Nochmal einen Applaus hier für die Expertin hier oben. Ja.